Before we start, leave a like and subscribe to Heroes of Faith for more epic Bible stories. Just as faith lights the path, your like lights up our work. There was a time before the counting of suns and moons when the heavens were not merely the domain of light, but an immense and impregnable citadel of will, where the order of the eternal manifested itself in pillars of pure essence. In that immemorial era, the angelic hierarchy was the perfect reflection of justice, and among the most sublime positions was Gabriel, whose very existence was the personification of the decree. He was not the flaming blade of Michael, nor the healing balm of Raphael. He was the herald, the irresistible breath, the voice that pierced the silence and the barriers of the cosmos to plant the seed of prophecy and warning. He never raised his hand in combat, for his mission was more subtle and profound, to shape destiny through the word and not by brute force. His glory resided in the purity of his communication and in absolute fidelity to the word. However, this era of peace and crystal-clear function was about to crumble under the weight of an ancient grudge, and the messenger archangel would be forced to walk through an ordeal of silence and blood, where the voice that heralded order would, for the first time, need to be silenced to preserve it. The ordeal that befell the fortress of light did not come from an unknown enemy. It erupted from the depths of the abyss, where the ancient host of rebellious angels wallowed in fragments of pain and corrupted memory. Imprisoned for ages after their original insurrection, the bitterness of their failure fermented into a desperate fury, and now led by an entity consumed by bitterness, a being who had once walked on a mutual mission alongside Gabriel, they charged against the veil of creation. This veil was not a wall of stone, but a luminous barrier, woven with the very sanctity of the cosmos, separating light from eternal darkness. The suffering of the herald archangel was twofold: the imminence of chaos and the affront of having his former companion, with whom he had shared silent confidences about the mysteries of the order, at the forefront of the assault against the very essence they had sworn to protect. It was the deepest of injustices to see loyalty turn into betrayal and light into shadow. In that moment of urgency and imminent danger, Gabriel was summoned to the presence, not to receive a revelation or a prophecy to be delivered to the aeons, but to be confronted with the most absolute and dense of silences. The absence of words was, in itself, an order that resonated louder than any celestial trumpet. His brothers Michael and Raphael were at their posts, preparing for defense with their usual instruments of war and healing, but for Gabriel, the silence was a spiritual humiliation, a brutal inversion of his purpose. His voice, the most powerful and influential of the entire pantheon, was denied him as a weapon. The Eternal did not ask him to announce victory, but to be the barrier, to prevent the advance of the fragmented. The mission was clear: to prevent the rupture of the veil, and the instrument of his fidelity would be his decision, his silent action, and the solitude of the warrior who must sacrifice his most precious gift to fulfill an even higher duty. The celestial battlefield was not soil or clouds, but an ocean of liquid light, where the very essence of creation pulsed. The rebel host advanced like a black tide of turbulence and rancor, their cries of hatred and despair tearing through the harmony of the aeons, seeking the crack they themselves had caused in the veil. Gabriel then ascended to meet the darkness, but not with the pomp of a herald or the fury of a general. He came enveloped in an aura of contained pain and solemn resolve. His weapon was not a sword, but a simple staff of light, a silent rod that did not emanate flames, but cut the air with the cold precision of a solidified memory. Each step was agony, for he did not march against enemies, but against distorted reflections of his own history, against the memory of shared oaths and missions accomplished in the time when the light was won. The faith that moved him was not one of triumph, but of obedience, the most bitter and necessary of all virtues. The advance of the rebel host was a living testament to the malice and skepticism that had consumed their very essence. They no longer believed in the order, only in the anarchy of their own pain, and they advanced with the grim certainty that the herald, the angel of the voice, would be incapable of offering physical resistance. They mocked without uttering a sound the one who came with such a simple artifact, hoping that the weight of betrayal and the novelty of combat would cause him to falter. But the Eternal One had other plans for his messenger. The staff of light in Gabriel's hands was not a weapon of attack, but the symbol of immutable will, and every movement the archangel made was devoid of hatred, laden only with infinite responsibility. The pain of losing his former brothers was a silent fire within him, but this pain did not weaken him. On the contrary, it tempered his resolve, transforming him from a passive herald into a silent defender whose loyalty was tested in the cruelest of furnaces, the confrontation with the past. The first impact was not a collision of brute force, but a clash of essences. The rebels, driven by the dark and turbulent energy of resentment, hurled themselves against Gabriel with the intention of corrupting, of breaking, not his body of light but his faith. They attacked with the memory of failures and with the tempting promise of lawless freedom, but the archangel, in response, moved with a dance of duty and precision. Each blow of his staff was a trace of golden light that sought not destruction, but the reaffirmation of the integrity of the veil. The battlefield, once a chaotic maelstrom, began to be delineated by luminous trails that functioned as spiritual seals, reinforcing the barrier that the fragmented ones desperately tried to break through. The antagonists, confused by the coldness and effectiveness of his defense, saw their attacks dissolve not into power, but into order, and the shock on their corrupted faces was a testament to the unexpected manifestation of the power of obedience. In that season of drought and celestial mourning, where hope seemed to dwindle with each rebellious advance, Gabriel's true trial unfolded on the horizon of light. He did not fear death, for death does not exist for archangels, but he feared the failure of his mission and, even more so, the inevitable confrontation with the leader of the host, his former friend. The omniscient narrator saw the herald's soul writhing in a conflict of loyalty and duty, for he knew the depth of the bond that had once united them. The rebel leader's malice was palpable. His skepticism towards divine order was the driving force of his fury, and he observed Gabriel with a mixture of scorn and sadness, as if to say, "See, how obedience has made you a mere voiceless soldier." But the archangel, though feeling the weight of compassion, knew that chaos, once unleashed, would make no distinction between friend and foe, and the redemption of the fallen was not in his hands, but in the just hand of the Creator. Hours passed which in the celestial reckoning seemed like eons of agony. The rebel host dwindled not through annihilation, but by being sealed again, one by one, touched by the silent light of the staff, returning them to their confinement, but with the veil of creation even stronger. The leader, isolated and cornered, finally launched himself against Gabriel in a last act of despair and betrayal. His attack was a storm of dark energy, a silent cry of resentment and pain seeking mutual destruction. He who had been the voice of prophecy now stood before him, who had been the voice of friendship, and the cosmos held its breath. The pain in the herald's heart was immense, but his fidelity to the divine design forged in the silence of that ordeal was even greater. It was the final test of faith, to choose between sentimental ties and cosmic duty. Gabriel's hesitation was not weakness, but the last spark of his celestial humanity, soon replaced by the cold and inevitable necessity of the order. The rebel leader, whose name lay forgotten in the chronicles of light and was only remembered as the personification of resentment, attacked with the fury of one who has nothing left to lose except his own pain. In his assault, he silently cried out for an ancient complicity, attempting to break Gabriel's concentration with the memory of days of purity and mutual purpose. Has the herald perhaps become a mute executioner? His corrupted gaze seemed to question, searching for the crack in the archangel's armor of duty. But Gabriel, though he felt every fragment of that memory pierce his essence, remained firm, sustained by the only thought that mattered. Letting the veil crumble would mean the return of primordial chaos and the destruction of the Creator's work. Divine design did not allow the weakness of misapplied compassion, and the archangel understood in that instant of excruciating pain that true mercy lay in preserving the order, even if it cost him his own torment. The final confrontation did not unfold in long, dramatic movements. It was a moment of tense stillness and irrevocable decision. The rebel leader unleashed a blow of dense, dark energy, a desperate cry of revolt that sought to tear the fabric of reality. In response, Gabriel did not flinch in search of tactical advantage, nor did he respond with overwhelming power. Instead, he stepped forward, absorbing the essence of the attack not as damage, but as the physical manifestation of disorder, and delivered the blow of his staff of light. It was not a devastating attack, but a precise, definitive gesture that ended the rebellion with the coldness of a decree. The staff touched the essence of his former companion, and the light that emanated was not destructive but sealing, a touch of absolute order that undid the corruption and imprisoned the remaining fragment of that being in an even deeper confinement, forcing the revelation of divine purpose in its most cruel and necessary form. At that moment, the battlefield, which had previously pulsed with the mute noise of conflict, was enveloped in a silence that was not empty, but full of meaning. It was the silence of divine justice, manifested through the obedience of a servant. The golden traces of Gabriel's movements merged into a complex and luminous pattern, reinforcing the crack in the veil, welding it together with the force of his faithfulness. The pain in the archangel's heart was visible to the omniscient narrator, an indelible mark of the sacrifice of his bond, but the satisfaction of duty fulfilled shone with even greater intensity. The spiritual transformation was complete. The herald of the word had become the pillar of silence, proving that unwavering faith resides not only in the ability to proclaim, but in the readiness to act when proclamation is not enough. The battle was won, the chaos contained, and the veil of creation, stronger than ever, pulsed with the renewed energy of order. And it was then, at the apex of its silent triumph, that Gabriel, the messenger archangel who had exchanged his voice for a staff, finally spoke. His voice was not that of a herald announcing the future, nor that of a warrior celebrating victory. It was a spiritual seal, a profound echo that resonated throughout the cosmos, crossing the barriers of light and the depths of the abyss. His single phrase, laden with the weight of superior will and personal sacrifice, was, "The voice of the Lord remains." This declaration was not a prophecy. It was the absolute reaffirmation of the covenant and protection, the inevitable fulfillment of the promise that order would prevail, and the legacy he left was not one of glory, but of unconditional fidelity, an example that true strength lies in obedience to divine design. The only phrase uttered by Gabriel, "The voice of the Lord remains," echoed like a thunderclap of silence, a declaration of triumph that needed no exaltation, for it was the very manifestation of divine justice. The shock among the observing angels was palpable. The messenger had become the defender, and the power of the word had been demonstrated not in its transmission, but in its retention and subsequent release as a seal of order. The initial indignation at the injustice of the rebellion and the pain of the ordeal gave way to a profound satisfaction in the victory of faith. The archangel, exhausted not by physical struggle, but by the torment of the decision, paused for a moment in the ocean of light. He did not rejoice. He only felt the weight of duty fulfilled and the pain of eternal separation from his former companion, aware that the redemption of a fallen angel could only come from repentance and not from complicity. The contrast between before and after the ordeal was stark and vivid. The Gabriel of yesteryear, the herald of gentle countenance, whose power resided solely in the eloquence of his surrender, had been forged in the fire of sacrifice into a being of unwavering resolve. His eyes, which once reflected the light of prophecy, now carried the depth of silent battles and the wisdom gained in the painful choice between the bond and the law. He returned to heaven, not enveloped in hymns of glory, but in a mantle of reverence, for he had proven that obedience and faith are the foundation of all celestial power. His transformation was the epic of a servant who refused to be defined by his gift, but rather by his unwavering fidelity to the design, ensuring that the fulfillment of the promise of order was inevitable. Gabriel's return to the fortress of light was an event of majestic stillness. The other archangels, Michael and Raphael, approached, not with questions, but with a silent recognition of the magnitude of the sacrifice. They had understood that the herald's ordeal had been the greatest of all tests of faith. The messenger archangel, instead of seeking rest or praise, returned to his post, resuming his staff of light, which now shone with the power of the seal and making it once again a symbol of its original function. The difference, however, was that his voice, when used again to transmit the decrees, would carry the authority and weight of one who had proven the truth of the word, not only by proclamation, but by silent and decisive action amidst the chaos. The legacy of that day was not inscribed on scrolls, but in the very fabric of the divine will. The story of Gabriel, the messenger who fought in silence and triumphed with a single phrase, became a prophecy about the nature of true fidelity. It taught that, even at the height of adversity and apparent solitude, divine justice would manifest itself through the servant who chooses duty over personal desire. The contrast of victory was proof that the gentlest of presences can become the firmest of walls, and that the word of the eternal, when sustained by an obedient heart, is the most unbreakable power in the cosmos. Divine justice had been served, and the redemption of the order was complete. In that ancient time, before any seed of mortal life was planted in the cosmos, the betrayal of an angel carried a weight that humanity could never conceive. It was a fissure in the very perfection of the order. The omniscient narrator reveals that Gabriel's former companion, consumed by skepticism and envy of the herald's immutable function, had manipulated the pain of the imprisoned angels, promising them a freedom that was in truth anarchy. The malice in his heart was not merely rebellion against the Creator, but a resentment directed at Gabriel, whom he saw as the symbol of blind obedience. He longed to see the herald falter, to witness the messenger's fall in physical combat, proving that the word was weak in the face of force and rebellion. This profound personal enmity elevated the drama of the ordeal to a conflict of essences, where the unwavering faith of one was confronted by the disillusionment and wounded pride of the other. The silence imposed on Gabriel was, in fact, the most astute of divine strategies. Had the archangel announced his arrival or uttered a command, he would have given the rebels the opportunity to counterattack with the disorder of empty words. But by presenting himself as a mute warrior, stripped of his most powerful gift, the herald forced the fragmented to confront the order in its purest form, silent action and will. The archangel's solitude on the battlefield was a physical manifestation of his singular devotion, for he stood there alone, without the support of Michael's commanding voice or Raphael's calming presence, to demonstrate that faith does not require a chorus to be validated, but only the steadfastness of a single heart that chooses obedience above all clamor. Years passed, in the relative reckoning of the aeons, before the memory of that silent confrontation settled in the psyche of the heavens. The rebel host, sealed once more, carried with them the vivid memory of the shock and belated regret at seeing their leader's betrayal, confronted not with fury, but with the coldness of an unnegotiable duty. They understood in their renewed confinement that Gabriel's triumph was not over strength, but over fidelity, and that the final blow was not one of hatred, but of divine justice, an act of redemption for the order. Their skepticism was crushed by the inevitability of the fulfillment of the promise. The account needed to be a historical chronicle of the transformation, showing that the ordeal was not a deviation, but the culmination of the herald's purpose, elevating the moral of the story to an epic level. Gabriel's physical and spiritual transformation after the ordeal was remarkable and profound. The before and after were stark contrasts. The lightness of the messenger had been replaced by the gravity of the pillar, but his light was more intense and his presence more resonant. The archangel, who once only transmitted the covenant, now embodied it. He not only spoke of divine protection, he had defended it with the silence of his actions. This change was a lesson for all creation, proof that the deepest connection with the eternal manifests in unquestioning obedience, even when that obedience demands self-denial. The dramatic and captivating account delved into the idea that true victory lies not in changing reality, but in accepting and fulfilling the higher design, regardless of the personal cost. The covenant that Gabriel sealed that day was not one of words, but of blood, light, and the sacrifice of will. The omniscient narrator reveals that, as we continue on this journey, subscribe and walk with us through each new tale, and leave a like to support Heroes of Faith. At the moment his staff of light touched the rebel leader, there was not only the confinement of corruption, but a cosmic reaffirmation of the pact between the Creator and the Order. The Archangel, choosing duty above fraternal bonds, became the silent guardian of the unalterability of the decree. This protection, woven with silence and action, was more powerful than any wall, for it resided in the certainty that there would always be a faithful servant willing to pay the highest price to maintain the integrity of creation. The epic of redemption was complete, showing that fidelity is the only currency of value in the celestial realms. Divine justice manifested itself eloquently and irrevocably in the defeat of the fragmented ones. The indignation that the rebellion had caused in the hearts of the loyal angels was purified by the satisfaction of the victory of faith. The rebel leader, upon being sealed, experienced a profound shock of repentance, not because of the punishment, but because of the sudden and vivid understanding of the futility of his revolt. The skepticism that had driven him crumbled before the majesty of Gabriel's intervention. He realized that the weakness lay in his own pride, and not in the order he had tried to overthrow. The account, like a historical chronicle, underlines that the triumph was not only a military victory, but a moral victory, elevating the moral of the story to the glory of obedience. At that time, the atmosphere of trial was dense with the dust of shattered stars and the muted echo of broken oaths. The reader needs to immerse themselves in this scene of celestial desolation to visualize the before and after of Gabriel's intervention. Before, there was the terror of imminent rupture, the threat of chaos flooding the aeons. Afterward, there was the sacred silence of restoration, the certainty of order. The contrast of victory was the purest of spectacles. The darkness of revolt, being absorbed and dissolved by the light of responsibility. The Archangel, in his solitude, had filled the cosmos with a context of faith, situating the reader on the chronological line of overcoming, where the action of a single faithful being reversed the turn of destiny. Gabriel's legacy solidified as a silent prophecy for the generations of beings who would inhabit the cosmos. He demonstrated that true strength does not reside in the power to command or destroy, but in the capacity to submit to the design, even when that design demands the inversion of function and personal sacrifice. His story became the epic tale of redemption through faithfulness, inspiring a profound connection with the idea that spiritual transformation is achieved not in the pursuit of glory, but in the humble acceptance of purpose. The Archangel was now more than the messenger. He was proof that the Creator's promise is fulfilled through the obedience of his servants, and his presence inspired reverence, reminding everyone of the price of order. The celestial hierarchy, which had always seen in Gabriel the ultimate exponent of eloquence and communication, witnessed with astonishment and reverence the new dimension of his power. The messenger archangel, by silencing his voice and wielding the staff of will, demonstrated that divine authority resides not in the ostentatious gift, but in the unbreakable essence of obedience. The manifestation of God's faithfulness through his servant was an act of profound cosmic pedagogy. It taught the angels that the greatest power is self-control, and that the true strength of the decree lies in its fulfillment, even if silently and sacrificially. Gabriel's transformation was living proof that trial is the crucible where faith becomes unshakable and where the servant's destiny aligns perfectly with the higher will, unquestionably elevating the moral of the story. The narrative, like an ancient saga, demands that the drama be heightened without losing focus on the story of overcoming adversity. Gabriel's pain in confronting his former companion was the climax of this drama. It was the pain of a judge who must condemn a brother, knowing that justice is more important than affection. The contrast to victory was the sudden and absolute silence that followed the single touch of the staff of light. There were no explosions or cries of agony, only the silent dissolution of corruption, a surgical act of separation between good and evil. This moment caused indignation at the original betrayal, but immense satisfaction at the victory of faith, for it showed that divine intervention does not need spectacle to be majestic. It only needs to be precise and just. In that post-conflict atmosphere, the messenger archangel, now the guardian archangel, walked with a new gravity. He did not dwell on the philosophy of duty, nor did he allow himself the luxury of prolonged contemplation. His mind was focused on the recovery of the order and the restoration of the veil. The reader was invited to feel the turning point of destiny, the drastic change of the herald from a gentle figure to an imposing and resolute presence. The staff of light, once a mere object, now vibrated with the power of the sealed covenant. Gabriel did not give random information. He filled the account with the context of overcoming, showing that his journey of spiritual and physical transformation was the center of the epic, inspiring, and connecting everyone with the reality of a faith that manifests itself in action. The focus on the journey of transformation through faith was the essence of the chronicle. The archangel, upon returning to his post, was no longer Gabriel merely transmitting messages. He was the message of fidelity itself. His humility in accepting the inversion of his role from voice to silence, from herald to warrior, was a testament to his absolute trust in the design. This trust was the driving force behind his overcoming, and the final triumph seemed an inevitable fulfillment of the promise that the order would be maintained. The narrative needed to be dramatic and captivating, and the drama resided precisely in Gabriel's internal struggle and the majesty of his intervention, proving that the true epic is that of the soul that submits to the higher will, emerging stronger and purer from its ordeal. The memory of Gabriel's ordeal became an indelible landmark in the timeline of heaven, a perpetual reminder that fidelity is tested in the stripping away of what is most precious. The omniscient narrator details that, henceforth, when the herald uttered a decree, his voice carried not only the clarity of the message, but the authority of sacrifice. He was no longer merely the messenger. He was the custodian of the order, the one who had defended his own right to the word with the silence of action. The contrast between before and after served to amplify the reverence his presence inspired. The gentle and eloquent Gabriel had been replaced by a figure who radiated a peace forged in inner battle, a triumph. That was the purest manifestation of the higher will. At that time, the celestial atmosphere, after the turbulence, was filled with a feeling of profound and well-deserved redemption. The satisfaction of the victory of faith was shared by all the loyal angels, who saw in Gabriel's triumph the confirmation of divine justice. The archangel, in his apparent solitude during the battle, had demonstrated that abandonment is merely an illusion for those firmly anchored in obedience. He had become the model of the servant who, even without fully understanding why his role is reversed, trusts completely in the design. This trust was the true weapon that sealed the fate of the rebels and guaranteed the inevitable fulfillment of the promise of protection. Gabriel's legacy as a prophecy went beyond the simple victory over the rebellion. It established a new paradigm of service, where the greatest honor is not the power conferred, but the readiness to renounce that power in the name of a greater purpose. The archangel did not philosophize about duty, he embodied it. His story, told like a chronicle of ancient sagas, taught that true spiritual transformation lies in the ability to act with conviction and silence when the world expects clamor. The narrative, in its eloquent and solemn tone, sought to elevate the moral of the story, showing that faithfulness is the only bridge between trial and triumph. The drama of that day lay in the tension between affection and law, between compassion and duty. Gabriel, hesitating for a moment before the final blow, demonstrated the depth of his emotional conflict, becoming even more human in his celestial essence. However, his final decision, firm and silent, underscored the role of faith and obedience in cosmic events. The shock and repentance of the antagonists, upon being sealed and confronted with the truth of the order, were the irrefutable proof of divine justice. The archangel had fulfilled his mission in a captivating way, making the reader feel the majesty of the intervention and the inevitability of the victory of faith over malice and skepticism. The reverberation of Gabriel's single phrase, "The voice of the Lord remains," endured for eons, functioning as an acoustic seal that reinforced the veil of creation in a more absolute way. The omniscient narrator clarifies that it was not the volume of the voice, but the authority of the heart that uttered it, a heart that had endured the deepest loneliness and the apparent abandonment of its function. That day was the watershed that transformed the herald into a symbol of passive and active resistance. He demonstrated that unwavering faith is not the absence of pain, but the capacity to act through it, transforming the suffering of trial into an act of divine triumph. His epic was the chronicle of a destiny that, when reversed, revealed his true and deepest vocation, that of guardian. At that time, the injustice of the rebellion and the archangel's pain were vividly contrasted by the silent glory of his faithfulness. The account needed to be detailed about the initial suffering, the weight of having to raise a weapon for the first time, the agony of facing a brother, the sacrifice of his vocal essence, and in contrast, the final triumph, which was not noisy, but a resolute peace. Gabriel had fulfilled his mission without unfolding irrelevant technical details. He focused on the acts of spiritual transformation, showing that the humiliation of having his voice silenced led him to a test of faith that culminated in the revelation of his divine purpose. The vivid description of the before and after elevated the drama and moral of the story, proving that divine intervention is always a form of justice. The impact of Gabriel's actions on the rebel host in their confinement was the harshest of sentences. They were not merely imprisoned, they were confronted with undeniable proof that their revolt was an illusion of power. The shock of the archangel herald acting silently and with cutting precision shattered the skepticism that drove them. Gabriel's former companion, sealed by the order's light, experienced repentance in its purest form, the recognition of his error and the irreparable loss of his former position. The narrator reveals the antagonist's deepest feelings, underlining that their malice was crushed by the majesty of unwavering faith, ensuring that triumph seemed an inevitable fulfillment of the promise that the order would prevail. The eloquent, solemn, and melodramatic language used to narrate this ancient saga was crucial in elevating the narrative to an epic. Gabriel, upon returning to the citadel of will, did not seek praise, but the continuation of his service. His transformation was a lesson that true greatness lies in accepting the weight of responsibility, even when it demands the denial of one's own gift. He had become the personification of the alliance and protection, and his legacy was the prophecy that the Creator's voice, even in silence, is the most unbreakable power in the cosmos. The account, focused on the journey of faith and the contrast of victory, fulfilled its role of inspiring reverence and connecting with spiritual overcoming. In the eternity of heaven, Gabriel's story was not merely a tale of victory, but a manual of fidelity. The context of overcoming was crucial. The messenger archangel had overcome not an external enemy, but the internal temptation to question the design that had stripped him of his voice and forced him into an unknown unknown action. This overcoming, detailed in its pain and resolution, was what made the chronicle captivating. The reader was led to visualize the herald's inversion from emitter of light to pillar of support, and to feel the turning point of destiny guided by the higher will. His transformation was proof that the deepest spiritual connection resides in accepting the test, however cruel it may seem. Gabriel's progression of faith, from herald of the word to silent guardian, was consistent and undeniable. He did not linger or philosophize about the situation. He simply acted with the unwavering certainty that obedience was the only answer. His final triumph, marked by a single powerful phrase, sealed not only the veil, but the very nature of his legacy. The divine justice manifested in his act was a lesson that true power resides in purity of intention and absolute loyalty. The account avoided superficiality, providing specific details about the initial ordeal, the loss of his voice as a weapon, and the final triumph, the silent seal, underscoring the epic of redemption. The drama of the narrative was amplified by the vivid contrast between the Archangel's apparent fragility at the beginning of the ordeal and his solidity at the moment of victory. The Gabriel before was eloquence, the Gabriel after was authority. The Archangel had become a figure who inspired not only reverence, but a profound connection to the idea that transformation is the path to the inevitable fulfillment of the promise. He was not a war hero, but a faithful servant who, in fulfilling the most difficult command of his existence, proved that the voice of the Lord truly remains, unaltered and eternal, sustained by the obedience of his heralds. The atmosphere of trial, thick with threat and silence, gave way to a new era of stability in heaven, where the manifestation of God's faithfulness was unquestionable. The account, in its melodramatic and solemn tone, focused on the contrast between victory and the sensations of justice and redemption. The skepticism of the rebels had been crushed, and Gabriel's faith had been magnified. He had become the chronicler of his own sacred epic, demonstrating that overcoming adversity is intrinsically linked to the will to submit to the design, ensuring that his triumph was the highest moral elevation in history. The citadel of will, the fortress of light, saw in Gabriel the most sublime example of the virtue of patience and waiting, virtues rare in the urgency of the cosmos. The Archangel, by accepting silence as his weapon, taught that true divine intervention often manifests itself in restraint and not in explosion. His journey of transformation, from messenger to guardian, was proof that the purpose of a being can be reversed and deepened, but never denied. His epic was a tale of justice that elevated the moral of the story, showing that obedience is the key to accessing the deepest and most unbreakable power of creation. He not only transmitted the truth, he personified it. The contrast of victory was the sudden and absolute return to harmony. Where before there had been the mute noise of hatred and revolt, now there was the ordered pulse of light. The staff of light, which had been his silent weapon, became the symbol of his new authority, the authority of one who does not fear sacrifice. Gabriel, upon returning, did not seek rest. He sought the continuity of service, a return to his original function, but now with the weight and wisdom of trial. The reader was invited to feel the majesty of divine intervention, which manifested itself through the humility and faithfulness of a single being. In that season of drought and mourning for betrayal, the Archangel messenger had planted the seed of new hope. His solitude and apparent abandonment during the battle were now seen as the pinnacle of his connection with the Creator, proof that true faith needs no witnesses. Gabriel's transformation was the most eloquent of messages, that overcoming adversity is the path to personal and cosmic redemption. The account, in its melodramatic and solemn tone, focused on the acts of spiritual transformation, ensuring that the narrative was an epic tale of redemption and triumph. Gabriel's legacy, as a prophecy of fidelity, assured that the divine covenant and protection were sustained not by walls, but by the unwavering will of his servants. His story was the definitive chronicle that the malice and skepticism of antagonists would always be crushed by the force of obedience. The Archangel, in his silent return, was living proof that triumph seemed an inevitable fulfillment of the promise, and his presence in heaven inspired reverence, reminding all of the price of order and the glory of unwavering faith. The tale of divine justice had been written, and its moral was the highest. Submission to the design is the true source of power. Eternity unfolded from that day with the certainty that the veil of creation would remain unbreakable, sealed by the herald's faithfulness. The omniscient narrator, with the solemnity of an ancient chronicler, records that Gabriel's greatest honor was not the victory over the rebellion, but the testimony that submission to the higher will is the most powerful of weapons. He had taught that silence when laden with duty, is more resonant than any war cry. His transformation of essence, from a soft voice to a pillar of support, was the manifestation of God's faithfulness, an act that inspires and connects all beings to the reality of an overcoming that transcends merely physical understanding. At that time, indignation at the injustice of betrayal was transformed into eternal satisfaction at the victory of faith. The Archangel, resuming his role as messenger, now did so with an authority that went beyond the office. It was the authority of sacrifice and proof. His vocabulary, though never excessively informal, gained a gravity that resonated with the experience of silent combat. He had become the unbreakable link between order and the word, ensuring that the inevitable fulfillment of the promise of protection reached every corner of the cosmos. With the certainty of one who had seen chaos contained by his own hand, Gabriel's epic was not one of personal glory, but of redemption of his function and proof that divine design prevails. The narrative needed to be dramatic and captivating from beginning to end, and the drama resided in the Archangel's solitude and the pain of his decision. His figure, once gentle, was now the vivid contrast between the lightness of the messenger and the gravity of the guardian. He had immersed the reader in the story, visualizing the before and after and feeling the twist of fate. His story was the definitive tale of divine justice, elevating morality to the glory of unquestioning obedience. The progression of Gabriel's faith and destiny was consistent and unchanging. He had passed through the trial humiliation, overcome the test of faith, witnessed the revelation of divine purpose, sealed the covenant, protection, achieved triumph, faithfulness, established the legacy, prophecy, and manifested divine justice, redemption. The account was complete in its structure and depth. It did not deviate from the central theme, focusing on the manifestation of God's faithfulness and the overcoming of the trial, providing all the necessary emotional and contextual details for the ancient saga. The messenger archangel, now with the authority of guardian, remained at his post, a silent witness that order is stronger than chaos. His return was proof that the most difficult of missions is the one that demands the denial of the self. The shock and final repentance of the antagonists, upon being sealed, served as the final seal of divine justice. Their malice had been confronted by unwavering faith, and their skepticism by the certainty of obedience. The tale of Gabriel, the silent messenger, would forever be a chronicle of overcoming, a beacon of hope and fidelity throughout the aeons. The voice of the Lord, which Gabriel had defended with his silence and his actions, remained, and the herald was now the eternal echo of that unbreakable truth. He had fulfilled the higher purpose, and his epic was the purest manifestation of the triumph of faith over adversity. The narrative reached its climax and its conclusion, leaving the reader with reverence for the majesty of divine intervention and satisfaction for the victory of the faithful servant. The story of Gabriel, the herald who fought in silence, was the most eloquent of messages. That true strength lies in obedience and sacrifice. The tale ends, but faith lives on. Subscribe, like, and be part of this mission to keep the light of truth burning.